Let's talk.
John Brown.
The End of Woke, How the Culture War Went Too Far and What to Expect from the Counter-Revolution is a new book by Andrew Doyle. It investigates the rise and fall of the woke movement and how we can prevent it from happening again. I'm joined on the line by Andrew himself. Andrew, good morning to you.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure's all mine. Before we get going on this, what is your definition of woke? Because a lot of people will be waving, saying they're anti-woke, they're pro-woke, but keeping it clean. What on earth is woke in your definition?
Yeah, there's various definitions depending on who you speak to, and various studies show that no one really agrees on what it means. So in the book, I give a sort of comprehensive overview of what I think woke means, but I can do it in a sentence for you if that's better. I would say that woke is a cultural revolution that seeks equity according to group identity through authoritarian means. And I think that basically covers it.
So through authoritarian means, because a lot of people we now be sort of throwing their cornflake packets at the wireless, saying, or their muesli, in fact, but by saying, but no, we're not authoritarian, we're liberal. If you're not woke, that basically means that you're a Nazi.
Well, woke is the best synonym that I can think of for woke is anti-liberal. I mean, the key distinction between what we had in the 90s and the late 80s, early 90s with the political correctness movement, which was a kind of clumsy negotiation towards some kind of social contract by which we prioritize decorum. What the woke does is it takes the noble ideas that are rooted within that and tries to impose it through either censorship, through intimidation, through bullying, through what they call cancel culture. I mean, that's the chief weapon of the woke movement. It developed this retributive system whereby anyone who deviated or dissented from the ideas that they were espousing were punished, publicly shamed, had their reputations and livelihoods utterly destroyed. So this movement has become very, very powerful, very, very quickly among a small minority. I mean, let's not forget that according to the studies, the More in Common initiative found that only 8% of the population has ever supported woke ideas, even at its height. It's been imposed top down from people in power on a population that has been subdued and doesn't really agree with it. Everyone knows that human beings cannot change sex. Everyone knows that it's not a good idea to hyper-racialize society and segregate people by skin color. But that, ironically, is what the woke were pushing for. This overemphasis on group identity has resulted in, for example, the American school in London segregating children by skin color for after-school activities. That was happening throughout America as well. We've seen children, gender non-conforming children, medicalized and put onto irreversible medical treatment simply because they didn't conform to old-fashioned stereotypes of what it means to be male or female. I think the big problem is a lot of people thought that all that woke meant was being kind and that just being alert to social injustice, alert to the problems of racism, sexism, etc. Unfortunately, it wasn't that. It was something very, very different. And the movement got very far very quickly, precisely because most people misunderstood its aims because the language had been so mangled.
When you're skating between the differences between and the historical and cultural injustices that have been done, it does. You need to have a certain amount of knowledge, stroke intelligence to be able to deal with each case individually. And the problem with any movement is the fact that a lot of people who get involved in it just see it in black and white. And life, Andrew, as we both know, isn't like that. And it's much easier to take to your social media feed and go, damn the torpedoes, etc. And if you're not with us and you're against us, there are so many differing shades of grey or shading in this particular, especially when you're dealing with the vast multicolored sort of kaleidoscope that is the wokeness.
Exactly right. There's been a dearth of nuance throughout this latest phase of the culture war. And unfortunately, I mean, you're absolutely right. Words such as woke have been thrown around as pejoratives. I just use it simply as a descriptive. But absolutely, there needs to be discussion more than anything. The precise thing that the woke and actually a lot of anti-woke campaigners tried to shut down. It's a lot easier, isn't it, to indulge that authoritarian impulse to just say, I'm not interested in what this person says. Let's publicly shame them and silence silence them and not listen to them. But actually having a discussion is important. I mean, for instance, when it comes to the question of DEI, when it comes to the question that is at the heart of critical race theory, which is why is it that racism still persists in a society where it is where it is effectively outlawed insofar as you become a pariah if you're openly racist? Why does racism still persist? That's a very good question. The liberal approach to racism is to tackle it as and when it appears, and to recognize that we'll never wholly eliminate these negative aspects of humankind. That's the harder approach, but it's the most effective approach. It's the approach that was adopted by the likes of Martin Luther King, who espoused colorblindness, who said, let's judge people by the content of the character, not the color of their skin. That's the liberal goal. The woke approach to social justice is very different. The woke approach presupposes that every interaction is underpinned by racism, that racism is systemic and endemic in society, and seeks to tackle it even where it doesn't exist through these sledgehammer tactics. That's not helpful. In fact, you've even got the situation where modern woke activists such as Robin DiAngelo, who's the author of White Fragility, actually problematizes Martin Luther King's stance on prioritizing character over skin color, and effectively comes out with the conclusion that Martin Luther King was espousing racist ideas. Now, that's a middle-aged white woman basically trying to denigrate the liberal legacy of Martin Luther King. That's what the woke movement does. It turns things on its head. It makes people, genuinely progressive people, start to endorse regressive ideas because they don't understand it, because they don't understand what it is they are endorsing. That to me is the problem. That's why I've written this book, The End of Woke, because I'm trying to firstly explain what this movement was all about, what it was actually achieving, as opposed to what it purported to achieve, and how you navigate your way through the linguistic minefield that it has set up. And also I'm talking about what we do next, because ultimately, the woke movement as we know it is dying off. There are too many seismic changes going on. There's, for instance, the rolling back of diversity, equity, inclusion programs in the big corporations such as Facebook and Walmart and Google and McDonald's. There's the Supreme Court judgment in the UK, which has found that you can't change sex in terms of the equality law simply by waving a certificate around. That makes a huge difference because it means that women's rights can be protected. It means gay rights can be protected. The very things that were eroded under the woke hegemony, even though the woke claimed to be upholding those very rights. All of these things are happening. So things are changing, things are moving on. Various activists and campaigners are quietly removing the pronouns from their bios. All of the signs seem to be saying that it's dying off. It is going. But what happens next? And I'm really worried that what might happen is that the woke activists might return in another form. They might resurrect, find a way to bring themselves back using different language, which is the game they usually play. But you're also leaving a vacuum there for right-leaning, identity-obsessed monomaniacs who might also come in. And I'm seeing a rise in that kind of ethno-nationalist, white nationalist kind of thing, which is bound to happen because the woke laid the groundwork for them. The woke said, you shouldn't think about yourself as an individual. You shouldn't think about your individual characteristics. You should think about yourself in terms of the group identity to which you belong. That needs to be prioritized. Of course, society became more racist. Of course, it became more divided. That's what's happened. So I really want to draw that distinction very clearly between the woke approach to social justice, which is an illiberal approach, and the liberal approach to social justice. They're very different things.
I just, I will always go back to a discussion I had with my tutors back in 1985, 86, 87. It was just after the Broadwater riots in London. You probably remember those called the killing of PC Clay. And we were talking about were we a racist society back then as well? And I remember all my very fight kids, I've always been a bit like this, but my, because we were 16, 17 and they would get, and this is 80s liberalism. So this is before we had the whole trans thing. And they were saying, my classmates were saying, oh, well, going down that whole Martin Luther King thing about, we are all one. And this is the 80s, remember? This is the time.
Yeah.
And I said, no, because, and I remember saying this to my form teacher because he almost killed me, but he was saying, and I said, yeah, I do believe that there is a racism in society, and he was like nodding along with this, and because the whole situation was the bad thing. And I said, because my teacher was from Belfast, and I said, look, the English have always had a problem with the Irish, and then it kicks off. But there is that inbuilt racism, the fear of the other. Southerners might have a problem with Northerners. Trust me, my mother was from Scotland. There is an inbuilt thing, but that if you like has been denigrated by this whole sort of painting of a broad sweep of a brush that doesn't come in many colours. Why have you decided, Andrew, to step on this minefield? Because are you throwing yourself onto the minefield, as it were, or tiptoeing gently around the claymores so that the others can follow and go, yeah, he's got a point here?
I don't think I'm tiptoeing. I mean, I've been quite sort of upfront about everything I think throughout this wretched culture war. And, as a result of that, because I do say what I think about these issues, I do get a lot of angry responses, a lot of abuse, a lot of threats, that kind of thing. But of course, if you're criticizing a group who are very powerful and who are bullies, but nonetheless think that they are the underdogs, they're going to lash out. You are prodding a beast there. But I think it's worth prodding because, as you say, racism hasn't been eliminated, discrimination and prejudice hasn't been eliminated, but the liberal says, well, no, it never can be because you're dealing with human beings. But what we do know is that every single reputable study into the United Kingdom tells us that it is not only the most tolerant of all societies in the globe today, it's the most tolerant of any society that has ever been. This idea that the woke have peddled, that we live in some kind of racist hellhole, which is equivalent to Jim Crow, is simply not true. And in fact, the woke argument is worse than that. The woke argument is that those racist ideas have been sort of subsumed within society so that you don't even notice. In other words, if you don't see any evidence of racism, that just means it's really well hidden. And the only way that it can be detected are by these sort of high priests of this new cult who are able, through their various machinations, to detect things. Well, and conveniently enough, when they do detect these things, they earn a lot of money, don't they? I mean, Robin DiAngelo was earning over $10,000 per hour to go into corporations like Coca-Cola and berate their employees and tell them to try to be less white. I mean, totally ridiculous. I mean, a total fraud. So a lot of that has happened. So, I think recognizing the problems in society and addressing them through the liberal system, which means actually asking for evidence of it before you address it, rather than taking it on faith. But also, above all of that, we want to live in a society where we can where we can tell the truth, where we can have conversations. Something's gone really wrong. I think what the culture war did was effectively tribalize society along political lines. So now even the slightest point of political disagreement is taken as evidence of evil, or even as you say, fascism or far right or something utterly preposterous like that. And I think we need to kind of reclaim this capacity that we all have if we put the effort in, to have those difficult discussions, have nuanced discussions, and don't leave the field clear for the most extreme voices. I think that's what's happened, is we've allowed the most bratish and irrational to dictate the terms of debate. And these are really important issues. So we can't have that. We want to reclaim nuance, and we want to reclaim discussion. And the woke would never have that. They would never, ever allow debate, because debate to them was effectively a means of surrender.
And you have to be careful with, as you said, that nuance, because what you're leaving is what we have seen as the pendulum swings one way to say, the diversity and try and be more white, you've got a huge amount of the population who are disenfranchised, and that opens itself up to, especially if and we have talked about this, there's been discussion about this whole toxic masculinity thing, about the Tate brothers, about the incel movement, about young men feeling disenfranchised, feeling left behind, not understanding what on earth is going on, and because they're seeing all what's happening, in other spheres of the culture, the arts, social media is a bad thing when it comes to this on all sides. And that's why they can't understand. They haven't been told in terms they can understand what a liberal movement is about, or what the aims are. They can't understand it, so they go to something which they can understand, or seems to make sense to them, which is perhaps why we're seeing some of the problems that we are seeing about a generation coming up, which must disturb you, Andrew.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think one of the things I try and do in my book is to very clearly outline what a liberal system would look like, what are the fundamental key liberal values that we should be returning to. And it's not just about individual autonomy and making our own choices for ourselves for our own selfish reasons. I think liberalism has often been mischaracterized in that way. It also incorporates an aspect of social responsibility. So it's absolutely freedom to speak as you wish and to act as you wish, right up until the point when when you encroach on the rights of others. It's such a key aspect to liberalism, which is instilled in what John Stuart Mill wrote on liberty, but is often forgotten. And that sense of freedom and the right to say what you want and the right to dissent, but also with one eye on what is good for society at large. That's really, really important. And you mentioned the incel movement, a lot of young men who are completely disenfranchised. And that's undeniably the case because they've been demonized for a long time. They've been told, yes, you have this thing called toxic masculinity. Boys have been effectively pathologized for behaving in the way that their nature makes them behave. I mean, Christina Hoff Sommers, the feminist, wrote a book about this called The War on Boys. And she's absolutely right. We were effectively saying we need to re-engineer society so that boys will behave more like girls. Well, you're not going to unpick many, many thousands of years of evolutionary history so easily. So, I do feel for those people who feel disenfranchised. And of course, a lot of boys were drawn to the work of Jordan Peterson, who was giving some really, really sound advice for young men. In other words, clean up your room, sort out your own life, take responsibility for your actions, stop complaining. All of these rather good tips for how to live. And he was demonized as a fascist and he was demonized as far right, which is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, I don't think there's any academic who has a stronger track record on opposing totalitarian regimes than Jordan Peterson, but they even managed to smear him as fascist. So then when you do that, you end up clearing the field for the likes of Andrew Tate. That's exactly what happened. And Jordan Peterson and Andrew Tate are giving completely antithetical advice to young men. And yet, because the former was so demonized, the latter has now come to prominence. This is absolutely clear to me. So I think again, we need to let people know what we mean by a liberal system, a truly liberal system, and how we can actually achieve that without just thinking in this crazed identitarian way that everything's about group identity. Men are like this, women are like this, white people are like this, whatever, just always thinking within those blinkers. It gets us absolutely nowhere.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing, I was listening to a podcast only 2 or 3 days ago. I was listening to a podcast, and it was a group of people discussing something, and they were talking about, could you write from the perspective of not being of that gender and B, that national or that ethnic group? And they were saying that, you couldn't take ownership of something unless you'd had that direct experience. And, again, at which point my music went thundering towards the podcast unit because basically it's like, well, if you think like that, then how can you write Lord of the Rings if you're not an elf or you're not a wizard? And they were saying that unless you'd had the experience of being a black woman, you couldn't write from the perspective of a black woman. And in fact, you were insulting people by writing that. But if you look at something like Barry Ainsworth's Sacred Hunger, which is a book about slavery, you don't have to be a slave to write about the black slave experience. But if you have historical knowledge, you can, unless you're saying that I was a black slave, then you can't write from that situation. And it's like saying you cannot have people acting if they're not transgender, if it's a transgender character, or if they're not Jewish, they can't play. I mean, we've had the Merchant of Venice so many times, this discussion about this, and that we are saying that you can, unless you are a black actor, you can't play a black character because you haven't had that experience. And I'm always drawn back to Dustin Hoffman and Laurence Olivier, and Hoffman had gone off, not seen with 48 Hours because his character deserved it, and Laurence Olivier said, what are you doing? And Hoffman went into this rumbling monologue, and then Laurence Olivier said, why don't you just try acting, dear boy?
Yeah, it's interesting you mention that because there is a chapter in my book on the arts and what's happened in the artistic world, particularly around this issue of identity. I mean, the arts is completely captured. I mean, it's really, really far gone. So now in publishing, for instance, if you submit a novel, if you're a novelist, it will routinely be checked by a sensitivity reader. This is someone who is there to check that various group identities won't be offended by your portrayal. When they republished Roald Dahl's books for children, they were sanitized by these sensitivity readers, rewritten, and actually ruined. They've done the same to P.G. Wodehouse, Agatha Christie, Ian Fleming. And of course, the idea that some know-nothing person in their mid-20s sensitivity reader, or censor as they should be known, is a better writer than P.G. Wodehouse or can improve P.G. Wodehouse's immaculate prose is so arrogant and entitled and preposterous. So, you know, for instance, if you're going to read any of those books, you really should buy secondhand copies, because the new versions are not the versions as the author intended. But this is happening across the board. Really, woke activists only see the world through group identity. That's the only lens they can interpret anything. The fact that they are so predominant in the arts means that they see the Mona Lisa and they don't see this masterpiece. They see paint daubed on wood by a white male in the service of other white men. And that's all they can see. And they do this with Shakespeare as well, which is why virtually every Shakespeare production I've seen over the past 10 years has been mangled through this lens of group identity. So it's no longer really Shakespeare anymore, or they're focusing on a very, very narrow aspect of it, and they don't see the rest of it. You can't read a play like The Merchant of Venice or Othello and just focus on the ethnicity of the chief character, just focus on the notion of group identity. Because if you do that, you can do that, and you're free to interpret Shakespeare however you like. I mean, the abundance of his art means that he is open to hugely vast differing interpretations, but you are doing a huge disservice to that art by focusing just through those narrow trammels. You're denuding it of so much of its quality, so much of the reason that the precise reason why Shakespeare has never been bettered as a writer.
The thing is, it's art. It's art, stupid. I mean, you bring your own interpretation to it. That's the beauty of culture, is that the way that a poem or a play or a monologue or a piece. I mean, I remember seeing Roadrunner, which is the brilliant documentary on the life of Anthony Bourdain, the celebrity chef. And the last 15 minutes is a really tough watch, not because he dies, it's because of his relationship with his final relationship, where he got so involved with the Me Too movement, and he was a sort of late 50s man with a much younger woman, and she was explaining this. They were looking at an art gallery, and she was seeing every piece of art there as the oppression of women, and like a lame Whatsit behind her, Bourdain was agreeing with it. And at which point, again, bowl of muesli being flung at the TV, and Bourdain had been a New Yorker. He'd just fallen under this, and I just thought, just to see the way that they were approaching everything had to be seen through this lens. Now, I'm not saying that the Me Too movement is not an absolute noble cause and terrible things have been done to people, but again, as you said before, Andrew, it's the nuance that's getting wiped out, and everything is, and there are brilliant female artists who have been overlooked, but you cannot see everything through a lens of white male privilege.
No, and nor can you expect immaculate moral behaviour from artists of all people.
Caravaggio, for example.
Well, quite. I mean, Caravaggio killed someone while he was trying to castrate him. Exactly. There are various. Look, if you expect moral purity from artists, you may as well wipe out most of the Western canon. It's gone. Artists tend to be eccentric. A lot of them are unpleasant human beings. People often talk about the fact that Roald Dahl said anti-Semitic things. Well, maybe, as Christopher Hitchens pointed out, maybe he had to be this kind of twisted, hateful person to come up with these incredibly perverted and wonderful books that he did. I just don't buy into this idea that we should be not just looking through an artist's back catalogue to determine whether the characters are morally sound, but looking through an artist's life to determine whether an artist is morally sound. There were rumours that Michelangelo had crucified a model in order to get the muscular contortions right for his depiction of Christ on the cross. Now, that was just a rumour, but had that turned out to be true, would we then be painting over the Sistine Chapel? This idea that we must expect this from these people, particularly if you go back to the ancient Greek culture, which was a slave-owning culture. You can't just bulldoze the Parthenon because we disagree with all of this stuff. So, absolutely, when it comes to the arts, very, very tricky. Firstly, I think we just need to get back to the separation of the art and the artist, which is something the woke cannot do. And the reason the woke can't do it is because they don't understand art. They really don't. They think it's just about the promotion of the oppressive group identity. That's all they think it's about, which is why it's so banal, which is why no great work of art has ever been produced within this last 15 years under the woke era. I don't think it can be. I don't think the conditions are right, because not only are artists censored, and they are censored by these sensitivity readers, not only that, But artists and creatives and writers also know that they won't get published, they won't get commissioned unless they are conveying the correct message. I mean, you mentioned a chap going along with the Me Too movement when he's on camera because he knew he had to, because it's sort of career suicide to do what I do and sort of say what you think. But on the other hand, I think it's very rewarding. And given that the overwhelming majority are on my side of this argument, it would be just wonderful if everyone just said what they thought, particularly with the arts, because artists are meant to be the most free thinking in society, the ones who think outside the box. At the moment, they're not getting any work unless they very much conform. We're expecting conformism from the most free thinking. I mean, that's a real tragedy.
Somebody, I've got a listener just WhatsApp me. Morning to Angela. She's saying, I'm twitching listening to this interview. Art will be lost. Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man by James Joyce should be read by all woke people.
Yeah, of course it should. And they won't approve. I mean, when Ulysses came, if we're talking about James Joyce, when Ulysses came out, that was subject to an obscenity trial. The publishers who serialized it in America were actually put on trial for that. Now, art will always push boundaries in one way or another, and it will always make people uncomfortable. And this expectation that the woke have, that when they read a book or watch a film, it should simply be reflecting what they think about the world, is so infantile. I mean, it's absolutely infantilism writ large. When you go onto the BBC now, the streaming service, the iPlayer, and you watch an episode of Fawlty Towers called The Germans.
Oh, yes.
There's a scene missing.
No.
But not only is there a scene missing from that, they don't tell you the scene has been cut out. It's just not there. And the reason it's not there is because the Major, who's an old dinosaur, uses racial epithets. Well, as John Cleese had to explain, very patiently, I might add, the joke is on him. He's the unreconstructed old dinosaur who doesn't understand the modern world. So we have this situation where comedy commissioners, people at the BBC, they don't understand comedy. Yes. They don't understand the target of satire. And they think paternalistically, they're going to stop you from watching it because you plebs out there, the great unwashed, you people won't understand it. You'll just hear the racist word and you'll go out and commit some kind of racist pogrom. That's how patronizing these people are. The woke movement's always been an elitist movement. It's always been predominantly upper middle class people who think they know what's best for everyone else, who patronize minorities by saying they effectively need to be treated in a special way and talked down to. The reason why I sound quite galled by it is because it's precisely the opposite of what they claim it is. It's not this wonderful, compassionate, arms open, embracing all people. It's the opposite. It's power. It's about power, in my view.
Just quickly, we don't have to mention things, but in that, the Major, is that the one where he talks about the difference between the West Indians and the Indians? Is that the
yes,
right?
So that scene is not there. It's just not there anymore. Now, you would have to be quite an idiot, frankly, to watch that scene and think that it's a racist scene, rather than mocking a racist.
Yeah, it's just the fact it's so many kids. I took her to see India. You did. I took her to see India. You did mention at the Oval, and then it develops from there. Which is I have the screenplays, the original.
Right, so you know when I'm talking.
I know exactly what you're talking about, and you probably wouldn't be able to pick that up. So go to a second-hand bookshop. I've only got 1 minute left, Andrew. So what are you hoping that people will take from your book?
Well, the title, "The End of Woke," is more a kind of aspiration than a prophecy. But I am talking about how I'm seeing evidence that the woke movement in its current form is falling away, which gives us an incredible opportunity. Let's not allow the more reactionary elements from the other side to come in and seize ground. Let's restore the liberal system. Let's restore the art of conversation. Let's allow artists to flourish again and take risks and not fear the cancel culture mob, because that's a very, very real thing. I know many, many people. I list in the book an absolute catalogue of people who've had their lives ruined, their reputations destroyed, their jobs taken away from them for no other reason than they said what we all know to be true. That's an intolerable state of affairs. And we went through it for the past 15 years. We all lost our minds. I think future historians are going to look back on this book and say, wait, did all of this happen? That sounds absolutely crazy. And so that's one of the reasons I've written the book. I want it to be recorded because I do think this mania will be incomprehensible in the future. People won't understand what went wrong. But it was hysteria. It was short-lived, and it is dying, I believe. believe. So the question is, what comes next? And that's what I want people to take from this book. You know, what should we do? What do we do with this opportunity now that we have?
The book is called The End of Woke. It's by Andrew Doyle. You can order it via our own virtual bookstore on TRE. Don't worry, we will send it out. Don't fret not. If people want to follow you online, Andrew, where's the best place to say nice things to you?
If you go to my Substack, probably it's andrewdoyle.org. That's the best place to find me.
The book is called The End of Woke. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much for having me.